Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Rosa DiDonato.
And I'm Marian Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn Nursing podcast supported by the Panola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm.
Yes, and I think one of the things that excites me in this space is that we do have a lot of technology tools that can help, but at the same time, there's a lot of ethical concerns and many challenges with technology. So we have to find the right balance and also design solutions that are appropriate. I feel like sometimes the technology moves so fast that we are trying to catch up in terms of our ethical or legal or policy implications.
On this episode of Amplify Nursing, we talk with Dr. George Demiris, the Mary Alice Bennett University Professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing and the Perelman School of Medicine, and also Associate Dean for Research and Innovation at Penn Nursing. Dr. Demiris discusses his work using technology and AI to support healthy aging. As director of the Penn AI Tech Collaboratory for Healthy Aging, he highlights projects like Sense for Safety, which uses AI to predict and prevent falls among older adults. He emphasizes ethical design, interdisciplinary collaboration, and the importance of involving older adults and caregivers in developing real-world solutions. Dr. Demiris also shares how programs like Penn AI Tech's Innovation Fellows Program and the Summer Innovation Institute are preparing leaders for the future of AI and healthcare innovation. All right, Dr. Demiris, thank you so much for coming to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to hear about the work that you're doing. So let's start with, we'll let you just kind of introduce yourself and talk about what brought you to the School of Nursing.
Yes, I'm George Demiris. I am faculty here in the School of Nursing with a joint appointment in biomedical informatics in the School of Medicine. And I'm also the Associate Dean for Research and Innovation in the School of Nursing. I'm not a nurse by training, but my work focuses on the use of technology and informatics tools for older adults in their homes and community settings. So I have been doing work for the past 30 years with older adults in home health, which is an area that is really fully aligned with the nursing research portfolio. I've been collaborating with nurse scientists since the very beginning of my research career. So I have been also funded by the National Institute for Nursing Research for many years. So I feel like I have been conducting nursing research, and our school here has been a great opportunity for somebody like me coming from a different background to establish those types of interdisciplinary opportunities and projects that can advance nursing science.
I love the idea of teams creating nursing research because although I think nursing has a really broad lens and brings a lot of great perspective, I think just like everything else, we have blind sides, right? And when you have someone who has a whole different perspective coming in and working with you, you can make the projects and the practice so much richer.
Absolutely. And I think, we are dealing with complex problems that do really require a lot of expertise from different disciplines and a lot of different perspectives. When I think about more specifically my area, aging and technology, there's significant clinical challenges, but then there's also ethical challenges, things that have to do with the environment, with human-computer interaction, with informatics and computer science, with architecture. So having interdisciplinary teams that can address these challenges from different perspectives is, I think, really necessary in order to come up with solutions that actually make sense in the real world.
So you've been in this space, as you said, for about 30 years. I'm sure you've seen a huge change in the way we use technology. What are some of the highlights of that, do you think?
Absolutely. So I actually started my very first project in home health when I joined the University of Minnesota as a PhD student, and at the time, my advisor, Stuart Speedy, had a project that looked at what was called at the time telehome care. And that was the idea that you could have virtual visits at home. And back then, we didn't have wireless or high-speed internet. So we were actually using the TV set as well as a box that would log into the phone line and use dial-up to connect a really poor quality video conferencing session. But even so, it was pretty innovative to think that you could actually talk to your nurse at home and see them, and they could see you, and you could even capture vital signs while talking to them and get a pretty informed plan based on data. Definitely, we've seen significant changes since then in terms of how fast the technology has advanced. There's definitely been changes also in people's perceptions. So at the time, having technology in your home for health monitoring purposes was unusual and in some cases stigmatizing. There were no Fitbits or Apple Watches or other things that allowed people to track their own health and wellness. So the fact that you had some type of device at home meant that you were a patient in need of assistance. And people were very concerned also about having medical devices in their homes and how they would use them, what they would say to their neighbors if they came and visited, and what this all really meant. Clearly now, with the proliferation of so many wearables and other types of devices, we have tools like passive sensing that is being used for entertainment, for security, for safety. So the health aspect of these technologies is not something foreign to a lot of people. We have generations now that are growing up being part of this quantified self movement where they track things about their own activity levels, their own caloric intake. So this idea of consumer facing health monitoring tools is no longer considered foreign or scary. There's been definitely significant changes also in allowing people to capture their own data and share their own data. I think we've seen more and more systems that facilitate patient-generated data. And obviously, AI has been around for a long time, but the last 3-4 years, we've seen almost an explosion of AI tools and such a significant growth, especially with generative AI, that people are now embracing these technologies much more so than ever before.
Yeah, I feel like there's been such an exponential growth in this whole space, and it's been really interesting to see. So, you're the director of the Penn AI Collaboratory for Healthy Aging. So, are you working on any particular projects that you're focusing specifically on AI and the aging population?
Yes, as you mentioned, I direct Penn AI Tech, which is the Penn Artificial Intelligence and Technology Collaboratory for Healthy Aging, which is an initiative that's funded by the National Institute on Aging. And this collaboratory funds pilot projects that are using AI or other advanced technologies to make an impact on the lives of older adults and persons with Alzheimer's disease. So each year we fund a number of pilots, and our pilot applicants come from industry, academia, and health systems. And we are trying to foster an ecosystem where this type of innovative thinking can actually grow and create impactful and innovative solutions. And we provide them mentoring and networking opportunities during that 1 year of their pilot project. So in the past 5 years, we funded more than 54 projects that are dealing with a lot of different aspects of aging and Alzheimer's disease. Some are meant for tools in the home, some in the clinic, some facilitate clinical decision support, some are about predicting cognitive decline. And what we see is that obviously there's a lot of opportunities to use AI to improve aging, but also there's many ethical and clinical implications in addition to the technical challenges. One project that I'm leading that uses AI for aging is an initiative we call Sense for Safety, and that uses AI for fall prevention. So more specifically, we're looking at how technology can be used to keep people safe who live alone at home. This is an intervention targeting community dwelling older adults with mild cognitive impairment. Falls are critical in the gerontology space, and cognitive impairment as well as housing conditions are significant risk factors. So we wanted to come up with a solution for people who are at risk for falling that would be more preventative in nature. So before the actual fall happens, rather than the more reactive system we have in place now where you have to experience the fall and then we're trying to minimize that impact. So we're using depth sensors. Depth sensors have been used in the gaming industry a lot. They create silhouette extraction rather than a video image of the individual. So they're, in a way, a little bit more privacy preserving. And our goal is not to store those silhouettes, but actually get information about people's gait, such as their stride length or balance, their gait speed, and calculate that individual's fall risk score. So the AI comes into this machine learning that over time learns to focus on the individual that's being studied and create tailored profiles for that fall risk score for that individual. So if you see changes in somebody's gait, they're more likely to experience a fall in the next 10 days than before. There's things we can do about it. In some cases, there's some exercises that can be even useful for people with limited mobility or for people with dementia. We're using the Otago exercise program, which is an exercise program that works for our population. There's also low-cost home modification efforts that can be made. For example, ensuring there's no loose rags on the floor or changing the lighting in the hallway. And then a coach can work with that individual also to problem solve around behaviors or patterns that can facilitate more safety. So the sensing system is creating these fall risk dashboards that in real time show you the lower extremity functioning of the individual and the likelihood that they may be experiencing a fall. And that's one example where AI can actually give us more information than we would otherwise have. This population does not go to a fall clinic or get formal gait assessments or get to talk to an expert unless they've experienced the fall. And we want that to not happen in terms of experiencing the fall. So by using a somewhat low-cost approach, we could prevent those events from happening in a way that we're also hoping can engage older adults. So we don't want people to be in the study and feel like we're monitoring you, but you don't need to know why, you don't need to know what's going on. Instead, we're trying to look at ways that they can look at their own gait data, decide who to share it with, and also find ways to make that information meaningful and accessible and relevant to our participants.
So, are you finding that you're running into barriers with trying to be proactive with, let's say, physical therapy or any kind of gait assistance prior to their falling? Because, like you said, typically we have like a reactionary system where we wait for the bad thing to happen and then deal with it. So, do you see that as a barrier, or are you trying to work out systems to make that more of a proactive stance?
I'm working towards creating new systems that can facilitate that proactive approach. One of the arguments that one can have on their side when trying to push for that is the issue of cost. So each fall costs a significant amount to our healthcare system. So preventing a fall can be actually not only important for people's quality of life, but also in terms of significant cost savings. And we are hoping that there can be interventions that are preventative in nature early on. I think in general, we've seen a lot of interest when we present the findings from the study to date from health systems and home health agencies. But one of the things that we still are working on is what is the ideal model for translating this into clinical practice. Not everybody would necessarily benefit from this intervention, but there are high-risk populations that would. And if so, how can we implement them in the real world in a way that doesn't burden clinicians, but it actually becomes a passive sensing, cost-effective solution for fall prevention.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's not something that you would think AI would be at the forefront of helping with that. When you know what I mean? I think when people think of AI, they think of like really high speed, very high technical things like that. And I think this is such an incredibly novel approach to use this technology to, I mean, the fall for an older person sometimes is the beginning of the decline of their quality of life. And to be able to prevent that is, I think, a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. And I think with a lot of these sensing technologies, we can install things in the home to better understand what is going on with activities of daily living. Let's say how much people are walking around, how much time they're spending inside the home versus outside. Um, but where AI can play a role is creating those algorithms that help us detect patterns and predict events in a more proactive way. It's not about having a human at the other end watching the data points arrive in real time. It's really about what does this mean for that individual, and what might be my daily activities pattern may be very different from yours. So the fact that I'm not moving much may not necessarily require immediate attention, because maybe that's what I've been doing every day. But if I've been waking up every morning, let's say at 6 a.m., and then one day it's 10 a.m. and I have not left the bed, that might be worth looking into. Or similarly, if I'm spending more and more time alone or engaging in sedentary behavior. In some cases, that information about activities of daily living can be very useful in allowing us to look into a lot of other issues that might be underlying factors. And again, hopefully preventing an adverse event from happening, not only a fall, but a lot of other events that could happen. We see in the smart home literature that many times you can detect certain things very easily. For example, if a person tends to wake up at night 3 to 4 times, and then all of a sudden they're waking up and going to the bathroom 12 times, that can easily lead to an investigation for urinary tract infection that can reduce an unnecessary hospitalization. But in other cases, it's much more complex. You see people who have significant shifts in their patterns of daily living, but you don't necessarily know the cause immediately. And we've seen some of those examples anecdotally that can be traced back to onset of cognitive decline. So in another study we had done with smart home technologies, we would see sometimes participants who had a pretty regular schedule in terms of when they had their breakfast, how much they moved in the home, when they had their lunch, and then would go out and come back for dinner. And then we would start seeing some significant deviations from that pattern, even though their physiological variables, their blood pressure, their glucose levels didn't change. So there was perhaps no need to intervene just by how the nurse would assess things every 6 months. But when you looked at those daily patterns, you could tell that something was different.
Yeah. And being able to intervene early on something like that could probably stave off a lot of different things. You know, you can probably even, you know, if you can intervene earlier, prevent or I should say, slow the rate of decline even in
Yes.
patients. Yeah.
And keep people safe. I mean, we see that even with some of the sensing technologies that are used to detect wandering behavior, in some cases, you may not be necessarily treating the disease, but minimizing the impact of the symptoms can also be very beneficial.
It sounds like it's really, I mean, it's incredibly important work, I think, to improve the quality of life of older people.
Yes, and I think one of the things that excites me in this space is that we do have a lot of technology tools that can help, but at the same time, there's a lot of ethical concerns and many challenges with technology. So we have to find the right balance and also design solutions that are appropriate. I feel like sometimes the technology moves so fast that we are trying to catch up in terms of our ethical or legal or policy implications.
Hmm. Yeah. Are there any specific ethical implications that you're looking at right now that you have concerns with?
Yes, so there's a couple of things that I'm particularly interested in. One of those has to do with the issue of consent. You know, when we have people sign up for not just research projects, but even in the real world, when they're signing up for, let's say, a certain type of service, we tend to think of consent as an event. Did they sign the document or not? When in reality, it is a process. And it is important because people don't necessarily know what they're signing up for, and the risks and benefits are not always clear. So, how do we actually obtain informed consent in cases where we may not have the full information as what all the unintended consequences could be? Or in some cases with AI, especially when third parties are involved, it could be a black box even to the researcher. We may not necessarily know exactly how the algorithm works. How do we address informed consent for people who are experiencing cognitive decline or people who have limited digital literacy, namely experience with digital tools and digital tool terminology? I think this is an area where we still have a lot of work to do um, because we see that people form their opinions as they live with different technology tools, and in many cases may not be fully aware who gets access to their data, who could potentially access their data, or whether they can share the data with others. I feel like this is an opportunity, not just in the research space, but in general, with all those technologies, to rethink how we're obtaining consent, and maybe even using some of these technologies that help us create a dynamic consent form process, meaning we use a standard language for all. Maybe we can create different templates that convey the same message, but adjust the consenting language to the literacy level, language, and style and preference of that individual. And then
Mhm.
maybe think of ways to assess consent over time periodically. And then again, um, address the very complex ethical issues around consent and power of attorney when you have people who are not consenting for themselves.
Mhm. Yeah.
Another challenge I find with ethical considerations has to do with generative AI. You know, right now we see a lot of applications that are using generative AI to create a digital friend or a digital companion for an older adult. And many of those are designed to engage a person in conversations, in small talk, in some cases, reminiscence therapy, or just provide entertainment. And a lot of discussion is taking place around would it ever be appropriate if a person with cognitive impairment could not tell whether this is a machine versus a human?
Mhm.
They interpret the digital conversation partner to be a human at the other end. And would it be appropriate if they get the therapeutic benefits of that relationship, or would it be misleading and therefore inappropriate? I don't know the answer to a lot of this, but I know that when we think about designing AI tools that are more anthropomorphic, there could be an element of deception, and figuring out what are the appropriate frameworks to preserve people's dignity is important, but it's nonetheless a pretty significant ethical challenge that I'm sure will um, be worth investigating as we see more and more of these tools, but even now, pretty realistically looking humanoids that are robotic applications that pretend to be humans.
So, is there anything else that the Penn AI collaboratory is working on that you're super excited about?
Yes, so Penn AI Tech is engaged in a series of dissemination and educational activities. So we have a video library which contains a lot of educational modules. And originally we designed this for our applicants, the people who wanted to apply for our pilot funding. But then soon we realized there is benefit to making this publicly available in general to the public. Those educational modules cover topics like what is Alzheimer's disease? What's the difference between mild cognitive impairment and dementia? But also things around technology. What is artificial intelligence? What is generative AI? What are examples of generative AI in the context of gerontology? what are clinical decision support systems, and many, many more topics. And we keep expanding that library with a goal to actually create more awareness of just those basic terms and concepts, but also some of the opportunities and implications for the general public. Along the same lines, we have a webinar series that is on our YouTube channel for those recordings, and we invite international experts in AI technology, but also gerontology and dementia care to talk about some of those current challenges. We are hosting different events. We had, for example, a work group looking at generative AI and gerontology and coming up with recommendations for system designers. And then finally, we are co-sponsoring the Summer Innovation Institute along with a J&J fellowship program. It's an initiative offered by the School of Nursing, and the Penn AI Tech awardees in the afternoon have dedicated sessions focusing specifically on opportunities designing technology for older adults. And in the morning, they participate with their peers from the other programs in the more general human-centered design and design thinking content. Additionally, we are creating what we call the Penn AI Tech Innovation Fellows. So we currently have 15 innovation fellows. Those are junior scientists, usually PhD students and postdoctoral trainees, who are coming to us with a background in either gerontology, nursing, and or AI, computer science, and engineering. And they are junior scientists who are really interested in that space of AI and aging. And they engage in reviewing proposals that we receive. They're engaged in our webinars, but also in some of the projects that we fund in terms of providing assistance with evaluation, participating in office hours. The goal is to actually provide opportunities for junior scientists to learn more about both the complexities, but also the many opportunities that this space offers.
Yeah, there's so much interesting stuff going on over there. And I'm pretty familiar with the J&J fellowship. And I think that's a really great use of a collaboration between human-centered design and AI technology.
Yeah, and along those lines, one of the problems has always been in the aging and technology space that we used to have a lot of vendors and industry partners who would design sophisticated tools without any feedback from older adults. And that has been a problem for many decades. I remember even back in the 90s, there would be blood pressure cuffs specifically designed for older adults, but never tested actually with older adults. Or in the fall detection space, many of those devices had been tested with stunt actors, who are usually young people who are trained to fall, but in a way that's safe for them, that may or may not always align with how real people fall in real world settings. And so the fact that we have so many technologies that are primarily used by older adults without having the older adults at the table when these systems are being designed has always been a significant challenge. And I see that now, even with AI, we are creating systems that use AI, but in some cases, we're using training data to train those generative AI models that do not have representation from the populations that we're targeting. So a lot of times, stakeholder engagement in the design specifically of AI technologies for aging is challenging, it's time consuming, and it's expensive, but it is necessary. We cannot design systems based on our own assumptions as to what people may need without actually validating those assumptions. And the Summer Innovation Institute is a great opportunity for people to not just think conceptually about I need to figure out what my end users want, but to think about a practical toolkit for facilitating that type of stakeholder engagement.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have your hands full with a lot of really exciting stuff. And we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of it and as you move forward. Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we wrap it up?
Not that I can think of. I think um, one of the things that I think I've mentioned quite often, and so maybe I'm just repeating myself, but one of the things we're trying to foster within Penn AI Tech is really the value of interdisciplinary work. And we are hoping to, in the lines of stakeholder engagement, to give voices to older adults and family members in a more formal role, not just to invite them to sessions and saying, how do you like this system that we're about to develop, but actually have them as actual team members. And the family caregivers are oftentimes an overlooked end user. When we think about technologies for older adults, we sometimes forget that there's often somebody else who, in addition to other tasks, is burdened with operating this new device or tool that we're introducing. So uh, formally recognizing the value and the work of family caregivers in that space is important. I think Penn AI Tech is trying to use that as a formal evaluation criterion for pilot projects. Do you capture and appropriately reflect the voice of patients and families?
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece of it. In my family, it was my brother. He was the one who was called to deal with all my grandmom's technical difficulties.
Yeah, I remember the very first
Um,
project that I think I mentioned to you earlier on. We were also using a portable spirometer where people had to use a tube and blow air as quickly as possible. But once there was this circle on the screen that would keep flashing, and then when it would stop flashing, that's when you had to actually start exhaling the air. So it wasn't the easiest thing to use, and a lot of participants were frustrated with doing it wrong, and the measurement would come out wrong because they would start exhaling air before the flashing stopped, or they didn't push the right button. So oftentimes we would have participants who would just decide that a family member should just do it and capture their lung capacity. They would like, you go ahead and do it because I don't want to be doing that. So not only did the family caregiver have to help operate the device, but in some instances, they were the actual data source for the data.
uh, that's part of the excitement of research like that, I guess. Figuring out, how this little tiny old lady has this lung capacity of a 23-year-old. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Demiris. It was great to talk to you.
Thank
And
you.
I'm really super interested to hear about all of the things that you're doing with Penn AI Tech.
Thank you for having me.
Hello, Marion.
Hello, Angela. What's going on?
I just had this fantastic interview I did with Dr. George Demiris from the School of Nursing.
Yes, I know him well. He's my boss.
There you, there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, I was really fascinated and so intrigued by the work that they're doing at the Penn AI Tech that George runs, and looking for solutions to use AI to help with healthy aging. And I think this is it's such an incredibly important thing to do because, there's especially now that we're moving into this shift where all the boomers are finally becoming elderly, and there's going to be so many of them, and, we're going to need all the help we can get. So I feel
Totally.
I feel like, utilizing this technology is such a smart move.
Yeah, when George took over as the Associate Dean of Research and Innovation, his focus obviously had been on technology, AI, and aging. And so, just in terms of proximity to him and his work, I've started to be more involved and attend some of the symposiums and conferences and things that he puts on. And yeah, the work that is being done in this space specific to aging, but also using AI. Like you said, it's totally fascinating. And I really do think it is going to make a big difference in the lives of the aging population. But, and we were talking about this before we started recording, there are some ethical considerations that need to be at least thought of and tried to be addressed.
Yeah, agreed. Especially when, for example, George and I were talking about some technology that encourages, older people who are home alone to have a conversation, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? A generative AI,
Hmm.
Alexa type situation. However, it's responsive. So you can see how that could be a little bit of a challenge. Ethically, you want to be careful that somebody who already doesn't have or isn't in some stage of cognitive decline is now having a conversation with basically a chat bot. And then there could be some further confusion there as to whether or not, you know,
Yeah.
person. So, yeah, super interesting. But also, I don't know, is that a terrible thing though? If somebody's home alone for significant periods of time and this is kind of what keeps their brain going so that when their family does come home or when people do engage with them, or for people who don't have families, you know what I mean? That it gives them that
I hear you.
opportunity to keep their brain going and in ways that are maybe productive.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think we have to think through all of the unintended consequences of any technology, right? Like I say it all the time, systems are designed for the outcomes they create, right? So even though we may not be thinking about, oh, if this person has some sort of cognitive decline and then they don't realize that they're talking to a chat bot, X, Y, or Z could happen, we have to at least plan for and think about how we would address that. I think with all these new technologies, that's all we can do is try and anticipate. But even for something like these generative AI and how rapidly these things are changing, it's almost not possible to anticipate because it's moving so quickly.
Yeah. And I think it's like you said, it's moving so quickly, it's growing so quickly. I think there are so many, unknowns that we can't possibly know until they start to happen. But
Yep.
I feel like if we at least start and walk into it knowing that things are going to pop up that we're never going to anticipate, that in and of itself is I think helpful anyway. And at least begin to think about plans to mitigate any kind of negative consequence.
Yes, you said that way more eloquently than I did. Totally agree.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing with you. But yeah, I mean, so incredibly impressive the work that people have come up with this. And one of the things that I was talking about with George was I feel like this is a space where the average person off the top of their head wouldn't think we would be using AI. You know what I mean? You don't think AI and elderly people. You know what I mean? And so even just the fact that people like George who are so incredibly creative in having the vision to see that these technologies have a space there and could be really really helpful for people is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is why loving this season of Amplify Nursing, focusing on AI. There's so much going on in this space and so many people doing really cool things. It's nice to be exposed to that and to be able to expose others to it.
Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angela Rosa DiDonato and Marion Leary and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through. We want to thank you for listening to the Amplify Nursing podcast and remind you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening. And if you can do us a solid, please rate and review us as well. It will go a long way in amplifying our episodes.